The information out there regarding command assets is pretty limited. There's several tutorials out there already explaining to people the basics, how to use them, what they do. So I'm not going to be touching on that. I'm going to assume you're kind of already past that and want to know a little more about the nuances of artillery and how command assets work, the really specific details. So that's what this is going to focus on. It may get a little dry at times. I'm going to include some chapters down here if you want to skip around. Hopefully this doesn't turn into a boring PowerPoint presentation, but here we go. Here's a few quick disclaimers. You could probably skip ahead 60 seconds if you want to skip this. This is focusing just on the government military factions. I'm not looking at insurgents or the militia in this video. Be aware that servers can be modified to change how rapidly Arty becomes available. There's a few out there like that. So keep in mind, you might not see some of these timer behaviors on every server, but the vast majority of them this will apply to. I'm gathering this information by myself for fun as of December 2023, and it may be dramatically outdated in the next version or two. So please be aware of that. And lastly, I'm sure comp gameplay is much different from public gameplay. This is focused on public gameplay. You comp guys, by no means am I saying this all applies to your games. I'm sure those are wildly different at times. So let's go through the timers for our assets. At the start of the match, the UAV will be 10 minutes out, the CAS Strike will be 15 minutes out, and artillery will be 30 minutes out. Once you use any of these assets, they will go on cooldown. For the UAV, it's going to be a 10-minute cooldown, and that usage does not affect the other assets. When you use it, it does not affect the cooldown of the other assets. Your CAS Strike, it'll go into a 15-minute cooldown, and your artillery, your other tactical assets, will be reset either to 15 minutes or however much time they already had remaining, whichever is greater. In other words, if your artillery had 18 minutes remaining, it's going to remain at 18 minutes remaining. If it had 3 minutes remaining, it's going to be bumped up to 15 minutes. When you use your artillery, that particular strike is going to go on a 30-minute cooldown. The CAS Strike and the other artillery are likewise reset to 15 minutes or whatever was remaining. And be aware that the cooldown begins once the strike or the artillery or the UAV is completed, not from when it's requested. So, for an example, when you place an artillery strike, it's usually about 60 seconds until it begins and another 60 seconds until it completes 2 minutes. The reset happens at the end of that 2 minutes. It'll be on the 30-minute cooldown. So when you actually use the artillery, you'll notice that as soon as you place it on the map, the old icon will turn green, indicating it's either en route or it's active, and it resets the timer then, which is kind of misleading because once the artillery completes, it resets it again, which you'll see here as the Arty wraps up. It'll reset it to a 30-minute cooldown. So don't let that fool you. It actually resets it twice, once when you click it and then once again when it's complete. With those details in mind, a few things to be real efficient with them. As soon as the match begins, get in, create a squad, and vote for yourself for commander if you're going to do it, because you will get a jump on the timer. The staging phase is 4 minutes. It takes 57 seconds to do the vote, for everyone to cast a vote for who's commander. So you can get up to a 3-minute jump on getting the timers going, which is nice. So literally, your first CAS Strike is only 12 minutes away, and the drone's available in 7 minutes. And use them. Use that early strike. If you get your first CAS Strike, once it becomes available, the Arty is still cooling down. It's still going to have 15 minutes left on it. So you might as well use that strike the second it becomes available if there's an opportunity to do so, because it's not going to impact the time until Arty's available. It'll still just be 15 minutes out. Use that UAV liberally too. It's going to be coming back in 10 minutes. It comes up pretty rapidly, and it doesn't impact the other timers. So don't feel like you've got to save it or something. If you're really curious about something, go for it. Put it out there. Here's a quick rundown on the details of the different tactical assets available. Creeping Barrage is going to be 50 meters wide and 100 to 300 meters long, depending on how you stretch it or concentrate it. You'll get 2 initial ranging shots and then what seems to be about 7 volleys. It takes 60 seconds after you make the request for it to start splashing, and another 60 seconds for it to complete. Static Barrage, it's going to be, of course, the circular pattern. It's going to be 100 to 300 meters in diameter, depending on how you stretch it, but 100 meters if you concentrate it. You get, again, 2 ranging shots and then what sounds like 5 volleys. I will say the 5 volleys in the static barrage tend to be more potent when they're landing. 60 seconds until they splash, and again, 60 seconds for the whole barrage to complete. On your CAS Strike, you can stretch it anywhere from 20 to 60 meters, and it takes about 40 seconds, give or take. Some of them are like 37 seconds, some of them are like 45, so anywhere approximately 40 seconds until the actual strike impacts. Something that's been changing over the last year or two with Squad is the availability for commanders to use assets from certain vehicles, but it is only with certain factions. I went through all of the various factions that are available now as of the release of the Turks. So it looks like the Turkish, the PLA, and the Russian Airborne, pretty much any tracked vehicles other than the main battle tank, you can use command assets from, which is really nice. You don't always have to be near a hab. Even Spruts you can use command assets from. So if you've got someone in the past who was hopping in an IFV of some type and taking command, and it was only 3 people in his squad, it's like, oh, why are you doing that? Come on, you need to be near a hab. Well, now that actually, if you're on these factions, it is actually viable, and you could even say it might even be advantageous, because now command can be in a 3-man squad running, say, something like a tracked IFV. He can call assets at any time. He doesn't, and if he dies or whatever, he can hold his spawn until the next Vic is ready, so that he could spawn at a hab if he needs to call assets. So it's actually pretty good on these vehicles. It really opens it up to allow different people to be command if they want to. For the U.S. Marines, they do have one option that they can do the same thing from. The only vehicle where it works is the AAVP Logi. You can call assets from that, but none of the other vehicles that I could find allowed you to do command assets from them. I spent quite a bit of time running from vehicle to vehicle on all the other factions, the U.S. Army, Russia, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, that I can find. None of them have any vehicles that allow them to do command assets from. This is something I welcome someone to correct me on. I tested what I could. You can't really test that from Jensen's range, so I was just loading up a variety of different maps and checking to see, and I could not find any VICs on any particular layer that I tested that allowed me to do that. So this is a unique advantage to the Turkish, the Chinese, and Russian Airborne factions. So take advantage of it if you're commander. And now we come to the really interesting part, in my opinion. When it comes to the tactical assets, right, the strikes and the artillery, there is a significant advantage that these 6 government factions have: USA, British Armed Forces, Russia, Russian Airborne, Chinese PLA, and Middle Eastern Alliance. Those 6 have this advantage with their tactical assets. I want you to see if you can guess what it is. I don't mean like the graphics or anything like that. I mean there's a significant actual impact, a difference that their assets have. I want to see if you can guess what it is. Pause it if you want to make a guess, and then once you've settled on it, move on. And if you guessed the effectiveness of the CAS Strike against a hab, you would be correct. It is a pretty significant advantage that those factions have. Their CAS is powerful enough to completely destroy a hab, sticks and all, outright. The remaining government factions, which is the U.S. Marine Corps, Canada, Turkey, and Australia, they cannot delete a hab. They can only take it down to sticks with a CAS Strike. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal? It's down either way. Well, if it's deleted, they have to replace it. That's going to require 600 build, a squad lead, infantry with a shovel, and of course the time necessary to rebuild it. Having all of those things is pretty rare, especially on, say, like an attack hab. I'd say it's a 50-50 chance if they've even got build at all, let alone the other requirements. On top of that, probably the most rare thing, as some of you know, is the squad lead. There's a lot of guys, just because a squad lead happens to be there doesn't necessarily mean they know what's going on. A lot of guys inherit that position, or they're new to squad leading. That may be more common than we'd like to admit. There's a lot of guys who just don't know what they need to do, and this leads to often those panicked conversations in command chat where everyone is trying to explain to some other squad lead who's new how they need to save the day and rebuild the hab, or how to juggle his kits to put the hab down and now go switch kits and get a shovel and bring it up. There's a lot that has to happen in a short amount of time, and all the while your friendly forces can push that and easily kill it now that it's been offline, probably for several minutes. You may outright devastate the fob entirely just from that one strike, regardless of if friendly forces are nearby or not. And I can hear people saying already, oh, that would never work against me. I always leave an extra 600 build on my fob just in case, or I always have a rally to spawn at just in case so I can get over there to handle it. This would never work. It's not a big deal. And that might be true for you. If you're out there, you're probably an above average squad lead. That is not the norm. That's why I say this is on public servers. This is something significant to take into consideration. This is not to say that a CAS Strike from one of these factions is the only way to delete a hab. For sure, a static barrage that's concentrated can also delete a hab. But quite often, whenever those two ranging shots fall, nearby infantry will run inside the hab, get their shovels out, and try to keep it alive as the barrage lands. And it may still get knocked down and everyone inside die, but if they repair it enough, they will at least keep it from being deleted. So there is that disadvantage to artillery. With a CAS Strike from one of those factions, if it's in the open and you get a clean shot on it, it is deleted and there's no stopping it. Deleting a hab with a CAS Strike has several requirements, so you got to be sure before you go and burn the strike that it's likely to succeed. Of course, first of all, you've got to be on one of those 6 factions we've already discussed. The hab needs to be exposed lengthwise. Sometimes people will set it into the side of a building. It needs to have the length of it exposed. You need to be able to shoot parallel down the length of the hab for it to be really effective. And about 50% of the hab needs to be exposed. Right? If it's just a sliver of the hab sticking out, it's probably not going to work. You might be able to disable it, but it's probably not going to delete it. And then finally, you've got to be sure nearby structures such as tall buildings, tall fences, things like that are not going to disrupt the ordnance being delivered. If all of that's true, then you should be able to completely delete the hab with close air support. When you go to place the CAS Strike, you're looking down through your UAV. You want to line it up exactly. There's 2 things you want to do. You want to make sure you're going down the length of the hab, and you want to make sure it's as concentrated as possible, because that's usually the most reliable damage that you'll get from it. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll look on the map. I'll place my observe on one end of it, place the strike request on the other end of it, and then just put the arrow between the two. Easy enough. One last gotcha to CAS Strikes to talk about is if they are out in the woods, if you get really unlucky, a single tree can block your entire CAS Strike. So be aware of that. It's very silly, I know, that that a tree is going to block bombs and A-10 Warthogs, but yeah, it's just an impenetrable barrier, and if it just so happens to line up with it, a single little tree can block it, like you'll see here.
Mission successful. RTB. Thanks for the work.
One thing that's not immediately clear to me is how strong the CAS strikes are compared to one another, and how strong they are when they're fully stretched versus fully compressed. That's part of what this test is looking at. Just lining up a whole bunch of habs here. We've got the Turkish, which they have one of their in the group that has the weaker CAS strikes. So we're going to stretch it out to max length, run it across a bunch of habs perpendicularly, and just see what kind of damage it does. It's kind of like the worst case scenario, right? And then we'll do the same for one of the stronger factions. So that's pretty disappointing. Obviously, you should not do a CAS strike perpendicular if you're one of those weaker factions and stretched match to max length. Shouldn't do it. It's not going to take down a hab. As we run up here and start looking at the health of the various habs, you can see it is doing very low amounts of damage, right? Would you even call this 10, 20% damage to these habs? And the other thing I've noticed is it seems right out there towards the far tip of the line that you stretch, towards the arrowhead, we'll say, is where it is weakest. That's where those final rounds are falling. So kind of be aware of that when you're using these kinds of strikes as well. So now we're going to hop over to the U.S. Army and see how the A10 stacks up when we do the same thing with it. I hopped over to Jensen's Range to do this next one just because it's much easier to get things going. There, while I'm aware, locally hosted Jensen's Range can have some weird differences with armor values and penetration values. For the purposes of testing command strikes, there does not seem to be any difference. I'm getting the same behavior out of them, so I'm sure someone will call that out. Just be aware it does seem to work functionally the same as far as RD and command strikes go. So that's quite the difference with the A10 versus the F16 or the F18. Yeah, the results speak for themselves. Every hab in that line disabled except for the very last one. And looking at the actual damage done, previously it was just 20 or 10% for the weaker stuff. Here they're down what, 33%, maybe 40% remaining. So I think it is fair to say the weaker strikes are at least 50% weaker than these. That is significant. So keep that in mind when you're deciding how to angle and how to compress and stretch your strikes when you use them. When it comes to using your CAS strikes against vehicles, there's not much to say. They're great for that. I love them. It's mostly for striking tanks to get a quick 17 to 18 tickets. You can use it on an IFV if you want, if the opportunity presents itself. That's your call. Most of the time, we're reserving them for tanks, though, to get to get them off the field, since they're the most difficult to remove. Your target's going to need to be stationary for at least 40 seconds, right? If someone gives you a strike request, you immediately go put the strike request down. It's going to take it 40 seconds to arrive, so you need at least that. If you've got to get the drone up to go do your own strike request, it's probably more like 80 seconds at least that you're going to need to do everything. You're looking, of course, for them to be tracked, engined, or repairing at a repair station. Or maybe they're just sitting there oblivious and they're just going to sit there for you for 80 seconds to let you do it. That has happened as well. And putting together what we already know, if you're on one of the factions that has the more potent strike, you can stretch it out pretty far. I think you can even go to max stretch for, say, the A10 Warthog and things like that and still get kills on tanks. But I wouldn't stretch it out unnecessarily. For the factions with the weaker strikes, I would not go past 40. I did some other testing here to see whether or not some of these max stretched weaker strikes could take out Vics, and it does not look good for them. Just like the HABs, vehicles can survive that. So keep those compressed, say 40 meters or less. Some quick notes regarding artillery barrages now. We'll start with static. Static barrages, if you concentrate it, it is the most powerful damage per square meter, we'll say, as compared to a creeping barrage. So if there's a singular target you're trying to hammer and put a lot of damage on, such as a HAB, then the static barrage that's fully concentrated is going to be the strongest, hardest hitting one. But be aware, even though a static barrage does have the ability to completely delete a HAB that's in the open, infantry that's digging from the inside can prevent the deletion by shoveling. It takes just a single engineer to be able to shovel it enough to keep it alive, or two standard infantry, which you'll see here. You may die, but at least you'll prevent the deletion of the HAB. And this may go without saying, but your HAB's exposure to the outdoors and how many walls are nearby it dramatically impact how effective the artillery is going to be. Even just placing your HAB next to a single long wall will change it from being completely deleted to maybe not even going offline at all, especially if there's someone inside shoveling like we're doing here. It just shields so much of the damage by just having a single wall right beside it. Which is why if you've got no options, it is like if you've got a building, you can't build inside of it, but you can at least build beside it, then always build beside it because of the damage that it will shield when that Arty lands. Where artillery really shines is if you know the location of the enemy radio, it's in the open, and there's no cover, there's no artillery cover for the enemies anywhere near that radio, you should instantly be thinking it's time to Arty that radio. And I would generally do it as quickly as possible, even if troops aren't ready to push and mop up afterwards. The reason being that Arty is going to put that radio on bleed very quickly. The Arty lasts 60 seconds. By the time it finishes, the radio will have already been on bleed for probably 30 or 40 seconds and only have 20 seconds left. Since there's no artillery cover, infantry are all going to be dead. And so the only prayer is that someone happens to spawn in off of a rally if they got lucky with their timer. Somehow they get in that last 20 seconds and happen to spawn there. Or if a vehicle drives up and manages to save it, which I've seen both of those things happen, but it's not common. And so usually I don't even worry if our team is ready to push that area or not. I will just go ahead and Arty it because you can usually delete it, that entire fob, on your own, unless they get very lucky. Here's a decent example, literally just last night from a game where we are on Black Coast, just across the river from Cali. We know the enemy set up a HAB and they're pushing. I've got Arty's about to come off cooldown, and so we're trying to get ready to drop it. We know where the HAB is, so I'm thinking I'm going to potentially just do a strike. But before things circle around, Captain Birdman, who's the heli pilot, manages to locate the radio. And at that point, it changes immediately. I'm thinking it's time to Arty.
I've got radio. I see radio out in the open on my 8 move marked.
I've got Arty in 60 seconds. I'm going to wait for that. Is that HAB accurate, George? Exactly accurate?
Exactly accurate. Yeah, I marked it exact.
Okay, copy. Yeah, go ahead and give me that strike request, Cambird.
Because he's doing stupid stuff right now.
Yeah, dude, I'm sorry. I'm too busy.
Bravo is exact, not the mark itself.
Alright, copy.
I'm in their HAB right now.
Guy on their HAB right now.
They got eyes on our rally.
Bye, I'm sorry, dude. Hopefully this doesn't wipe you. But, check map for Arty.
I'm gonna run
Check
out.
map for Arty.
Is that radio mark accurate? Do you know?
Yes, it is 100%.
Should get to. Oh, maybe it might be. Actually, the radio is on burn, I think.
Too slow.
Yeah,
Too slow to do it.
You got one
Radio's
big
on bleed.
too.
I got it zeroed in.
He's still moving around on me.
Copy.
Yeah, they
This
got
should
me.
be going in like 20 seconds because it's been bleeding a while, I think.
Copy.
So we're in Mutaha in the center island here. I'm putting out 2 habs. This one's going in police station. Notice it's kind of sticking out the back of the building a little bit. It is shoveled up. So clearly it is slightly exposed to the outside. We'll see how vulnerable that makes this particular one. Also putting down a second hab. Here, under this little cover. Going to get it built up. Get it turned. Oh no, it's only got 1 exit. This is a big no-no. But we're going to dig it this way. We'll see how well protected this is from artillery also. There's what that one looks like when it's done. Now we'll go give it a strike. Let's see, give the first one an actual strike and see what happens to it. So the exposure in the back, just that little bit, was enough to at least let us knock the top off. Not even remotely close to deleting this hab, but fair enough. The slight exposure did make it vulnerable to a strike. So next we're going to do a concentrated static barrage. It's going to cover where both of these 2 habs are. They're very close to one another here. So we'll see what the exposure on both of those habs, what kind of damage results from that exposure. All right, the already finished. Come up to the first one. As you can see, it's still clearly online. If we look at the actual damage done to it, what, 5-10% damage. A couple of shovels fixes it. Concentrated already seemed to have no impact given the kind of exposure it had there. We look at the other one, even less damage to this one, given the walls that surround it and its slight exposure. So that gives you an idea of what to expect from Arty in situations where, yeah, it's exposed, but not really. You're not going to get much on it. Do not throw an Arty on a target like that, expecting it to take it down, because it almost certainly will not. So given the praise that I've put on CAS strikes being so effective and static barrages having greater strength when they're concentrated, it sounds like I have no love for the creeping barrage, right? No, I love the creeping barrage. It's probably the asset I use the second most. The first most just being the CAS strike, because you get it so often. But the creeping barrage is by far the best anti-infantry asset that you can use. Or if there's some critical situation going on and they just need infantry to be cleared out, the whole broken arrow scenario, that is the best go-to asset for dealing with that kind of thing. It's also, generally speaking, the main asset you're going to be looking at when both the fob, or both the radio and the hab, are concealed indoors, where Arty's not going to do anything. At that point, it's just infantry to mess with, and so creeping is going to be your go-to, and that's going to be quite a few of the situations. It's the best thing for clearing a path from point A to point B to get your troops to push behind it, right? If you're trying to push an objective, that's going to be the asset you go to. And in that same scenario we discussed earlier, where the radio and the hab are both exposed, there's no artillery shelter for infantry that's nearby. But if the hab and fob are spread far apart, then a static barrage doesn't make as much sense. It's going to be hard to get both targets. The creeping barrage is going to be the better option. It doesn't hit quite as hard, but it's going to get that radio on bleed, and it's likely going to disable that hab as well as clearing all the infantry. So in that scenario, when they're spread far apart and exposed, I like it better. And now, the burning question that I know several of you have asked when you've had the UAV up and you know that hab is inside a little building and there's lots of holes in the tin roof that covers it. And I wonder if a CAS Strike can shoot in between those holes and take that hab down. Because we know Arty can't do it, but I wonder if a CAS Strike can. Well, here we go. And sadly, the hole-riddled tin roof wins. We just don't have the technology to crack that kind of surface just yet. Well, guys, that about wraps this up. It's about as far as I wanted to go. Hopefully, there was a little something in there to help you more easily choose which asset to use in what situation, some other things to look for, some advantages that you can find out there on the field. So good luck, and I guess we'll see you guys out there. Take care.